This DVD describes a teaching tool known as the Time Machine, which has been developed by Mackenzie to demonstrate to carers of people with dementia the important part that memory and emotions play in a person's behaviour. This tool gives reasons why people with dementia sometimes display unusual and at times problematic behaviours. Over many years, the Time Machine has proven to be an extremely valuable tool in helping carers to deal with such behaviours, whether occurring at home or in care settings. Before presenting the Time Machine, let me give you some background information. Virtually all people with dementia at some point during their illness will display some form of problematic behaviour, such as agitation, verbal aggression, apathy, disinhibition. Such actions are sometimes referred to as behaviours that challenge and can be defined practically as those behaviours, including apathy, that produce emotional distress in carers. In the past, behavioural difficulties have too often been treated via psychotropic medication, particularly antipsychotics. Such medication has only a moderate effect and a number of serious side effects. The alternative, psychological approaches, involves working with both the person with dementia and his or her carer. Experience informs us that problematic behaviours always require some kind of intervention from the carer, either because the carer is directly involved in the activity or because the carer is required to become involved in order to manage the behaviour. The current evidence tells us that those who manage behaviours best are those who employ a sensitive, person-centred style of communication and interaction. To be able to know exactly how to intervene, what to say, do or not do, it's useful for the carers to have some idea of what might be going on in the person's head, that is, what the person with dementia might be thinking and feeling. Unfortunately, when someone is confused or his communication is poor, it may not be possible to ask them directly about thoughts and feelings. At such times, we still need to pay attention to what they are saying and doing, but like a detective, we need to put the bits of information together to establish patterns that provide clues to the person's beliefs and emotions. Indeed, from our clinical work, we have observed patterns in virtually all the problem behaviours we've treated, although sometimes they've been hard to find. Our experience of working with hundreds of carers over the last 15 years tells us that two thinking errors get in the way of carers detecting patterns. In error 1, carers believe that the person with dementia's thinking is so confused and nonsensical it's not worth paying attention to. The second error involves a lack of awareness of the way memories are lost in dementia. Indeed, many carers continue to believe that the hallmark of dementia is an inability to remember. Many have never been taught that there are a number of forms of memory difficulty. For example, firstly, there's the loss in the ability to both lay down and store new memories. Then there is a gradual loss in being able to retrieve previously stored memories. And this loss does not occur haphazardly, rather the older memories tend to be better retrieved than the more recent ones, hence Lorna's notion of the time machine. Another important feature is that past events in which the person experienced lots of emotion are retrieved relatively easily compared to everyday happenings. So great moments of sadness, fear and joy are recalled particularly well, even in the later stages of the disease process. Armed with the above knowledge, which is illustrated in the Time Machine, we believe carers can begin to recognise the patterns in thinking and recall of people with dementia. As a result, carers will adapt their approaches according to the person with dementia's current understanding of his or her world.
So what does happen with memory and dementia? We hear and we see things. The things we hear and see are stored in your short-term memory, but it only stays there for up to a couple of minutes. If we're going to remember things later on, it needs to be stored in the long-term memory. For information to be transferred from the short-term memory to the long-term memory involves a few complex steps. We have to be able to make sense of information, i.e. encode it, then store it, and then if we want to remember it, we have to retrieve it from the long-term memory. In dementia, problems can occur in any of these three stages. If the person is unable to encode the information, then they obviously won't be able to retrieve it. The person might be able to encode but not store, so therefore retrieval can't take place, or the problem may lie purely with retrieving the information. To explain retrieval, I always think about being in your younger years, when you were out and about with your friends clubbing and drinking alcohol. Did you ever have too much to drink, so much so that you wake up the next morning and you can't think what you got up to the night before? You then get a phone call from your best friend who says to you, "Well, you put on quite a show last night." You say, "I don't know what you mean. What did I do? I can't remember." Your friend says, "Come on, you must remember. You were flirting with all the boys, including your mates' boyfriends, and you were slobbering all over them." Head in your hands, you think, "Oh no, I remember now. So I was. How awful." Thus, you can be cued into retrieving memory. We can also cue people with dementia into retrieving memory, but often that doesn't work. So keep this in mind, and we'll talk about this in more detail later. Now, we don't remember everything, but we do remember the memories which have strong emotions attached to them. Do you remember what you were doing at exactly this time last week? I asked some colleagues.
Normally I would do, because normally I'm at work, but last week I was actually on holiday and I'm not quite sure what I was doing. Hold on. I think I was shopping last week. I can't remember, but I think I might have been shopping.
I was at work. I couldn't possibly tell you what I was doing exactly this time though, but I was at work.
I would meet friends about 12:30, go for lunch to the town theatre, and then we'd go shopping, have a look around, see what we could find, and then we'd go for another cup of coffee, and after that I'd find my way home, get home about 4 o'clock.
This time last week, what was I doing? To be honest, no, not exactly. I was probably preparing some work to do later in the day, but I couldn't remember exactly, no.
So we don't remember everything, but if you had been at your friend's wedding last week, you might remember that and be able to tell me about it in detail. As time goes by though, these details become pretty vague until eventually it gets to the point when you remember very little about it, not even the year. But if you had been at your daughter's wedding last week, then you'll remember this in much more detail, even with the passing of time, because of all the emotions you experienced, the excitement, the pride and the joy, or it might be because of the sadness you felt at losing your daughter. My first memory is going to school for the first day. I can remember that really well because I was so worried about getting to the toilet in time. The upshot was that on my first day at school, I had an accident and I wet myself. I ended up with a pile of sawdust underneath my desk, but even worse than that though, I had to sit in wet underwear for the rest of the morning. The other kids in the class didn't let me forget that incident, and I got teased for ages afterwards. The strong emotion of shame and being ridiculed is the reason why I remember this. Do any of you remember your first day at school? Was there a strong emotion attached to it? Were you perhaps anxious and fearful when your mum left you at the school gates? Or were you perhaps really happy and excited? Can you remember your first day at school? Do you feel you could share what happened to you on your first day?
Actually, I do remember my first day at school, and I remember it because I was so devastated. We used to have this rocking horse, and every lunchtime we used to bring it out into the playground. And I used to stand in this queue, and every time I got to the front of it, the two people that were in charge of the rocking horse wouldn't let me on it, and they used to send me to the back of the queue. And I used to go back of the queue every day to try and get to go on that horse. And you know what? I never ever got a chance to go on that rocking horse, and that really made me feel really sad, but really upset and angry as well.
I do actually remember my first day at school. Yes, I do. I remember being taken by my mother, and I remember she didn't give me my favourite biscuit to take in, and I remember being most upset, and I wouldn't go in until she'd gone and got me the proper biscuit, so I was actually late going into my first day at school.
I do, yes. My first day at school was standing in a hall with a lot of other children and waiting to go on the rocking horse. I had a great big rocking horse and we used to go on that, take turns.
We all have some quite similar emotional memories. The following are typical memories that an older person will have. You will remember a few of them. Can you remember your first job? You may have felt quite anxious, or you might have felt quite excited, or maybe perhaps a mixture of emotions. Getting married, lots of emotional memories there. The love, the excitement and your hopes for the future. Having children, all the anxieties, not to forget the pain of going through that labour, but who can forget the surge of emotions when the midwife hands you your baby for the first time. Moving house, especially if it's to another town. the stress of moving and anxieties about making new friends or feeling anxious about your children being able to settle. Or you may have felt quite excited about the move, a new beginning. Death of a parent. If you've experienced this, you'll know it's a very traumatic, sad time and something you'll never ever forget. Retirement. For some, this may be the start of a new adventure. For others, it might be quite sad. The loss of purpose or wondering what you're going to do with so much time in your hands. Death of a spouse. Many of the people we're looking after will have experienced this and will have experienced much sadness. Coming into the care home as a resident. Think about all the emotions that the person may be experiencing. They will have lost their home and most of their possessions because you can't take everything into the home with you. How must it feel to know that your life will never be the same again? We previously discussed some of the typical memories that a person with dementia living in a care home might have. Let's talk about Jack now, and let's have a look at his timeline. Jack, who's got dementia, had to move into the care home because his wife Annie died. Annie was Jack's main carer. When Jack moved into care, he had insight into his memory difficulties. He knew he couldn't look after himself after Annie had died, and initially he settled into life in the home fairly well. As time passes, Jack, because of his dementia, starts to lose memory. In general, memory gets lost in dementia the way a factory would make redundancies. That is, last in, first out. So the last memory in is the first memory to go. The last memory in for Jack is moving into the care home. Jack is unable to retrieve this memory. What we will then see is Jack going up to the staff and saying, "Can I go home now? Can you open the door please?" The carer responds by trying to cue Jack into retrieving the memory. "Don't you remember, Jack? You moved in here about 2 years ago. This is your home now." Jack says, "Oh no, it's not, and I want to go home." The carer may again try to cue Jack into retrieving the memory. But the more she does this, the angrier Jack becomes, until Jack shouts, "Just open the door and let me out or I'll thump you." He even makes a fist in a threatening way. Put yourself in the shoes of a person with dementia. If I asked you what time you were going home today, you might say 4, 5, 6 o'clock. How would you feel if I told you that you're actually an old lady now and you're going back to a care home and you're never ever going home again?
Furious, anxious, angry and annoyed.
I'd think you were being ridiculous if you told me that, I suppose. I just wouldn't take it seriously to begin with.
We would recommend the following strategies. Number 1, we should always try to meet the person's need. However, in this instance, we can't meet Jack's need. We can't let him go home. He no longer has a home. Therefore, we'll look at the next best strategy, which is number 2. Substitute or simulate the need. Why does Jack want to go home? If he says it's to see his family, then we may consider using a simulated presence DVD. That's a DVD of the family or an audio tape of the family talking to him and reassuring him. If a woman with dementia is asking for a child, then we might consider trialling a doll. If substituting or simulating the need doesn't work, then we would recommend the next strategy, which is number 3, distraction. If we know that Jack gets anxious or agitated at a certain time of the day, then we try to preempt any difficulties using distraction. Keep Jack occupied. If we know he gets agitated around 5 o'clock, then we use distraction techniques about 4:30. This is where you really need to know the person. A one-size-fits-all approach won't work. We need to know about the person's life, their likes and their dislikes and their current abilities, so that we know what methods to use to distract. If distraction doesn't work, then the strategy would be number 4, enter his world and use non-confrontational methods. These are methods where the absolute truth is withheld because it's previously been shown to aggravate or cause distress. It's always used as an approach of the last resort. If it's used, we must ensure that all family and staff members are aware of the reason for using it. The approach must be documented in a care plan, not just to protect the person with dementia, but to protect the staff too. An example of the approach in this case might be, "Jack, your legs are bad at the moment, so can you stay here until they're better?" Jack has edema to his legs and he's got sores in his ankles. What we may say must fit with the person's reality. It needs to make sense to Jack. You're not saying that he can never go home, but you're giving him hope that he may improve, and if this happens, he will go home. Just think about how we would feel if we were told that we could never go home again. As we've just demonstrated, if we try several times to cue the person with dementia into retrieving the memory and it doesn't work, then it's futile to continue that strategy. We then have to think about what else we can do, as our response could cause the person with dementia to experience distress or might cause the person to become very angry or even aggressive. Often the person with dementia can be cued into wanting to go home by either the staff or something happening in the environment. Staff at the end of their shift might pop their heads round the door and say, "Cheerio now, I'm off home. I'll see you tomorrow." Jack is now cued into going home and is thinking, well, if you're off home, so am I. Jack could also be cued into going home by saying, "Another resident shouting in the corner?" Jack might think, "I'm not putting up with that racket, I'm going home." Or it may be that Jack simply just wants to go home. At the end of the day, we all just want to go home. There's no place like home, it's where we all want to be. Can you imagine what it must be like to sit with 50 strangers day in and day out? Would any of you choose to do that? No matter how nice the home looks and how nice the staff are, I'm sure we'll all agree that there's so many things that we'd miss about our own home. That's not being critical of care homes. The fact is that there's nothing like being in your own home. As dementia progresses, more memory is lost and Jack forgets the death of Annie. What we will then see is Jack anxiously approaching staff asking them, "Where's my Annie?" And again, staff should always try to cue Jack into retrieving the memory. But if Jack cries every time they do, then it's a very cruel strategy to use. As far as Jack's concerned, he's hearing the news of Annie's death for the first time every time the staff tell him this. How do you think you would feel if someone came into the room now and told you that someone very close to you had died? Would you respond the way Jack does? When he's told that Annie has died, would you be happy to remain where you are if you have just been told that your loved one had just died? Again, it's important what staff say to Jack. Follow the recommended strategies as previously discussed. Can we meet Jack's need? No, we can't. We can't give him Annie. Can we substitute or simulate the need? Why does he want to see Annie? Is it to help him with something? Would he let you help him? Is he feeling lonely and would having your company help? Or is he just so focused on seeing Annie because he's worried about her? If none of the first three strategies work, then you need to validate his feelings and reassure him in some way. What might you say if Jack asks you where Annie is?
Well, what I would actually say to Jack in this situation is, "It's all right, Jack, don't worry, your Annie's absolutely fine. But just to make sure, we'll give your daughter a ring and just check it out."
It's also important to remember that once you've actually shifted the focus, you then need to try to keep his thoughts from drifting back to Annie by using distraction techniques. As more memory is lost, Jack forgets that he is retired. What we might then see is Jack approaching the staff early in the morning, asking them to open the door because he has to get to work. The most aggressive person I've ever nursed did this. He suffered from Korsakoff's dementia, he had severe frontal lobe deficits, and as a result he had very limited social skills. He was extremely impulsive and would resort to physical aggression in an attempt to meet his needs. If you didn't do what he asked immediately, he would lash out. Nearly all the staff on the ward were very frightened of him because of his unpredictable behaviour. He'd come rushing down the ward on a daily basis just after 7. He would demand, using numerous swear words, that the staff open the door for him as he had to get to his work. The staff realised very quickly, after one of the female nurses lost her front teeth, another suffered a broken nose, and another a dislocated jaw, that trying to orientate him by telling him that he was in hospital just didn't work. We found out the reason he was so focused on getting to work was because in his working days, he'd been a labourer on a building site, and all the men were only employed on a daily basis. He had to be one of the first men to get to the building site, as only the first 20 men would get work for the day. It was therefore understandable why he was so anxious to get there. and why he got so angry with the staff on the ward who, as he saw, were stopping him. What do you think you might say to this man?
Actually, I know the man you're talking about, and what we actually did was we preempted him going to work. So wanting to go to work, so we'd go in with his tea and toast in the morning and say, "Hi, good morning, how are you? Isn't it good you're on holiday today and you don't have to go to work? Don't worry about it, you're not at work today."
Can anyone remember a time when you were late for work, especially if you had something important to do?
Oh yeah, I was, my clock had been put forward. It was the night the clocks went forward. I'd put the clocks forward, my partner put the clocks forward. There I was driving to work at what I thought was 7:15 and it was actually 8:15. And I knew that the man on duty before me off the night shift had to be home early that morning. And I felt ill. I was so anxious. I had a stomach ache. My heart was racing. It was just horrendous.
Well, there was one occasion when I was late for work, and this is years ago. There was a bus strike and I worked at the hospital then, and we had no way of getting there. And the hospital arranged for a special bus to pick us up and take us. But the only trouble was, by the time we got there, it was late. It was at nearly 10 o'clock, and obviously I started at 7:30. So the feeling I got when I got off that bus was dreadful. I was panicking. I felt sick inside. I just wanted to go to the toilet. I've never experienced anything like it. It was the worst day of my life.
It makes you feel frustrated, makes you feel stressed if you're late for work at any time. Yeah, it happened once or twice. Didn't happen an awful lot, but yeah, it happened once or twice, and yeah, just stressed, frustrated.
Death of mum or dad. As more memories lost, Jack forgets that his mum has died. He regularly approaches staff asking them to open the door because his mum is waiting for him to make her dinner. How many times do we hear residents in care homes stating that they have to get home to see to their mum or dad? How do you think we would feel if we had a dependent mother, one who relied on us to ensure that her basic needs were being met? How would you feel if someone stopped you from going to your mum if you knew that she depended on you?
I would actually be absolutely devastated, and I'd be really, really anxious probably at first, and I'd become really, really angry, and what I would do is I would probably really start to shout at you, and if you wouldn't let me go, then I'd start to hit you or kick you, just because I would know I needed to get there. They were relying on me.
If you stopped me going to see my mother and she was dependent on me, I'd be angry. I think that would be one emotion. I'd be angry. I'd be again frustrated, I suppose, and I wouldn't understand why you would want to stop me in the first place. Yeah, I'd be angry. I wouldn't go as far as hitting you, but I would be angry.
Moving house. Imagine Jack is still living at home with his wife. He no longer recognises his wife for who she is. He tells the staff at the day hospital he attends that the woman who claims is his wife is an imposter. He believes the imposter is his wife's older sister. He tells the staff that he's worried about what's happened to his real wife. He also tells them that he doesn't think he's living in his own home. One day the day hospital staff received a phone call from the police. Seemingly Jack went back to the house he lived in previously, a house he lived in 20 years ago. He didn't have his keys, so he knocked on the door thinking his wife would answer. The door was opened by a young man. Jack hit him, believing the young man to be a burglar who had entered his house. The police were called and Jack was taken to the police station. The police had called the hospital to verify what Jack's wife had said, that Jack had problems with his memory and believed he still lived in the house belonging to the young man he hit. We see this often with people with dementia who are living in their own home, don't we? Not recognising their home as being theirs. So they might leave their current home and go searching for what they believe is their real home. Has that ever happened to you in your experience as a care professional?
Oh yeah, I had this little old lady, she was lovely. Every day she used to go out the home, shut the door behind her and straight to the bus stop to get the number 10 bus, and every single day we had to go and get her and say, "Come on back, we'll take you later."
Children. This is where it can be quite upsetting for the children of the person with dementia, when Jack no longer recognises his son and daughter for who they are. Dementia is like a time machine. It takes the person with dementia back to a different time in their lives when all recent memories have been lost and can't be retrieved. Jack fails to recognise his son or his daughter because they're now in their 40s. In Jack's mind, they're still little children, hence the reason why he doesn't recognise the grown-up adults who are standing in front of him. Jack may start to call his son by his brother's name or his daughter by his wife's name, and the reason for this is that they resemble his brother or his wife from many years ago. Picture the scene. It's cold and dark outside and you have to go now to pick your children up from school. What might you do if I tried to stop you going? Might you get a little annoyed?
Well, having had young children and knowing that every day I was always there on time, and I really made sure of that, if you actually stopped me getting outside, I'd actually be very, very upset and I'd become very, very angry with you, and I'd make sure I get out that door to pick them up for their own safety.
Well, I'd be really angry with you, and if you continue to try and stop us, I'd probably go for you and punch you if you didn't get out of my way.
Dreadful, because if my children expected me to pick them up, I would have to be there. By hook or by crook, I would have to be there for them, no matter what.
I would probably force you aside out of the way if I had to go and get the kids if it was dark, because anything could happen. So I'd be annoyed. I'd be, I would be angry and annoyed, and I would just have to force you out of the way to go and get the kids, if there was some irrational reason in my mind why you were doing that.
The time machine appears to take a woman with dementia back to a time in her life when her children were little and her mother was still alive. It makes sense then, if she believes that she's in her 30s and her children are small, that by 4 o'clock in the afternoon she feels the need to be doing something. That might be picking the children up from school, getting her husband's dinner ready, or going to see grandma to make sure she's okay. However, men who suffer from dementia seem to go back further in time. I remember a gentleman called Jimmy. The reason for the referral to our service was because he was being sexually disinhibited. According to the staff, Jimmy would attempt to touch them on their buttocks or their breasts at every opportunity. Staff completed behavioural charts, and in scrutinising these, it transpired that the sexual disinhibition didn't occur in every interaction with the staff. The incidents of sexual disinhibition only happened during hands-on care, that is, getting him up in the morning, or bathing him, or helping him get ready for bed at night time. There were no male staff in this particular home, and because they didn't feel they could support him individually, they would attend to him in twos. Prior to devising interventions with the staff, I delivered this time machine exercise. Then I asked a staff member to go and ask Jimmy what age he thought he was. The staff member did so and came back and said that Jimmy believed he was 22. Well, I said, well, think about it. Jimmy thinks he's 22, he's got 2 young attractive girls in his bedroom who are taking his clothes off. What do you think he might think is going to happen? He's probably thinking all his Christmases have come at once. Staff thought this was quite comical, and there were lots of comments such as, oh, poor Jimmy, he's been thinking that we've been leading him on all this time, and we've been thinking he's just a dirty old man. Now, this didn't stop Jimmy from doing what he did, but it did bring about an attitude shift in the staff. Prior to holding the session with them, the staff believed Jimmy was a dirty old man, and they didn't want him to stay in the care home. As a result of having this new understanding of the time machine, Jimmy stopped being a dirty old man and became an old man who believed he was a young man just doing what young men do. Having the staff see Jimmy in a much more positive light then paved the way to devise an appropriate, consistent strategy to manage the difficulties. One of the carers said that when Jimmy attempted to touch her inappropriately, she would say to him in a firm voice, "Jimmy, my husband would be very upset if I told him you were trying to touch me there." According to the carer, Jimmy would then stop. She said that she had to keep a running commentary going about her husband to prevent him from touching her again. If she didn't keep on talking about her husband, then Jimmy forgot what she said and would start again. This was a strategy that all of the carers started to use, and on the whole, Jimmy's behaviour became manageable. The nice thing about it though was that the staff started spending more time with Jimmy now that they saw him in a more positive light and would use appropriate touch with him. Previously, the staff would avoid him because of his behaviour, which resulted in him having very few meaningful interactions with the staff.
So that was the time machine. It aims to reduce distress in people with dementia by improving carers' own behaviour and styles of communication. The knowledge it provides about memory and its links to behaviour allows carers to communicate more empathically. In other words, it gives us insight into how the person might be seeing his or her world and allows us to make a judgment of how best to respond. Over the last 8 years, we have published articles on the use of non-confrontational methods and firmly believe they are in the tradition of validation therapies and good person-centred care. Thank you for watching. Living with dementia can be a very isolating experience in which your reality or view of the world is shared by no one else. This may lead to distress, depression or agitation, which in the past we would have treated by medication. However, we are becoming increasingly aware of the importance of speaking and responding to people in ways that meets their needs, whatever their current reality. We believe the time machine is an important aid in achieving these good interactions. It's now over to you.